There is a photograph in my apron pocket right now as I speak to you. It is soft at the corners, from 80 years of being folded and unfolded, hidden and found again. It is the only photograph that survived in my family, the only one my father did not put into the stove. Everything else, every likeness of every face that ever loved me, he burned with his own 2 hands on a gray morning in November when I was 9 years old. I watched him do it. I watched the fire eat my mother's young face, my grandfather's beard, my own baby portrait, all of it curling black and then gone. But this one photograph, he kept. He hid it so well that I did not find it until the day we buried him, 61 years later. And when I finally understood who was in that photograph and why he had saved it while destroying everything else, I understood my father for the first time in my whole life. Before I tell you what was in that picture, I want to ask you for something. Because where I come from, we believe that a story is worth telling only if someone is willing to sit with you and listen all the way through. The way my own grandmother used to sit with me on the porch in the evenings with her hands never still, always shelling peas or piecing a quilt square while she talked. So, if you are willing to sit with me for a while today, I would ask you to press that little thumb, the like button, right now before we go any further. Because it tells me you are here. It tells me you are staying. And where I am from, that means something. And if this is not the first time you have found yourself listening to an old woman's memories on this machine, I would be so glad if you would press the subscribe button too, so that when I have more to tell you, you will know. And I would love more than anything to know where in this wide world you are listening from. Down in the comments if you would. Tell me your town, or your country, or just tell me it is raining where you are, or the sun is out. Whatever is true for you right now, I read every single one. My granddaughter helps me with that part. She reads them out loud to me at the kitchen table. And I promise you, it means the world to an old woman like me to know that people from so many different places are willing to sit and listen to a story from a life so small and plain as mine. Now, let me start at the beginning, because you cannot understand the ending of a story like this one without walking through the whole of it. The same as you cannot understand a quilt by looking at one square. My name is Miriam. I will not tell you my whole name, or the name of the district I grew up in, because that is not how we do things, and some of what I tell you today touches lives that are not only mine to hand over. But I will tell you that I was born in the autumn of 1947 on a farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in a white farmhouse with a wraparound porch and a barn so big that swallows nested in the rafters every single summer of my childhood. I was the 4th of what would become 8 children, though not all of us lived to grow old, and I will tell you about that too, in its time. My father's name was Eli. He was a tall man, taller than most of the men in our church district, with hands so large that when he held mine as a small child, my whole hand disappeared inside his, like a stone dropped into a pond. He had a beard the color of wheat straw that went gray early, before he had even reached 40 years old, and I used to think as a little girl that the gray had come into his beard the same week the photographs went into the fire, though of course that cannot be true. Hair does not turn overnight, no matter what the old stories say. But that is how it felt to me, watching him from the doorway of the kitchen that morning. Like something in him turned gray along with his beard, right there in front of the stove. My mother's name was Rebecca. She was a small woman, quick on her feet with a laugh that came easy and often, at least in the years before I understood what I am about to tell you. She kept a garden that was the envy of 3 church districts, tomatoes and beans and squash in rows, So straight, you would think she had used a string and a ruler, though she told me once she just had an eye for straight lines, the same as some people have an eye for color or an ear for music. She made the best choufle pie in the county, or so everyone said, and people would find reasons to stop by our farm on a Tuesday, just hoping she might have one cooling on the sill. We were old order Amish, the kind of Amish you might picture if someone said the word to you and a certain image came to mind. Horse and buggy. No electric wires running into the house. Plain dress. My mother and I in dresses she sewed herself. Cape and apron pinned just so. Hair parted down the middle and pulled back tight beneath a white prayer covering. My father in his broadfall trousers and his suspenders and his straw hat in summer, felt hat in winter. We did not have a telephone in the house. We did not have a car in the drive. We lived, as my father used to say, close to the ground and close to God, and for most of my childhood, that was simply the water I swam in, the air I breathed. Not something I thought to question any more than a fish thinks to question the river. Photographs in our community in those years were a complicated thing. I want to explain this to you carefully, because I think many people who are not Amish, and even some who left the faith young and did not stay long enough to understand it, get this part wrong. It is not that we believed a camera could steal your soul, the way some old stories from other cultures around the world tell it. That was never our reasoning. Not in my family's district. Not that I ever heard preached from any minister's mouth. Our reasoning came from something plainer, and in its own way, harder to argue with. It came from the second commandment, the one about graven images, about not making unto yourself any likeness of anything in heaven above, or in the earth beneath. But more than that verse alone, it came from a whole way of thinking about pride, about vanity, about what happens to a person's heart when they begin to fix their eyes too long and too often on their own face. My father used to say, though not often, because he was not a man who explained himself much, that a photograph freezes a person in one moment and asks the world to remember them exactly as they looked in that single second. Hair combed, chin lifted, eyes fixed on the little glass lens. And he believed, the way he believed the sun would rise, that this was a kind of lie. A person is not one moment. A person is every moment, the whole river of a life, and to reduce a soul down to one still frame, and then to hang it on a wall, or tuck it into a wallet and pull it out to admire, again and again, was to invite something into your heart that had no business being there. Pride in your own face. Pride in your own family's faces. A slow, quiet worship of the self that crept in so softly, you would not even feel it happening. Now, I want to be honest with you, because sitting here at my age, having lived the long life I have lived, having left certain things behind me and kept certain other things close, I do not know that I agree with every part of that thinking anymore. I have made my peace with photographs in my later years, more than my father ever did, more than most of my brothers and sisters ever did. I have photographs of my own grandchildren on a little shelf in my daughter-in-law's kitchen, and I look at them, and I do not feel my heart curdling with pride. I feel it filling up with something closer to gratitude. But I am not here today to argue theology with you, or to tell you my community's ways were wrong or right. I am only here to tell you what happened in my father's house on a particular morning, and what it cost him, and what it meant, because I think that story is bigger than the question of photographs at all. I think it is a story about grief, and about the strange, sideways paths that grief takes inside a man who has been taught his whole life that he is not allowed to speak of it directly. So let me take you back to that morning. The morning of the fire. It was a Tuesday, I remember that it was a Tuesday, because Tuesday was wash day in our house, and my mother had the copper boiler going on the stove before the sun was even properly up. The whole kitchen thick with steam and the smell of lye soap. I was 9 years old, small for my age, with 2 long braids my mother plaited every morning at the kitchen table, while I sat still as I could manage, which was not very still at all. There had been a meeting the evening before, a members' meeting, held at the Stoltzfus place 2 farms over. I did not go. Of course, children did not go to members' meetings, but I remember my father coming home late, after we children were already in our beds, and I remember hearing his boots on the porch steps, and then a long, long silence in the kitchen below, where I knew my parents were sitting at the table, and no words passing between them that I could hear, only the sound of the clock and my mother's chair creaking once, twice, when she shifted her weight. I did not understand, not then, what had happened at that meeting. It took me years, and conversations much later in my life with an aunt who was willing to talk about things others in the family preferred to leave buried, to understand the fuller shape of it. But here is what I came to know. Our district had, for as long as my father had been a member of it, been led by a bishop named Bishop King, an older man, gentle in his ways, a man who believed the Ordnung, which is the unwritten set of rules a district lives by, should bend a little here and there depending on the person and the season of their life. Under Bishop King, some families in our district kept a photograph or 2 tucked in a Bible or a hope chest, not displayed, not hung on a wall, never that, but kept, quietly the way you might keep a lock of a baby's hair. It was not exactly approved, but it was not confronted either. Bishop King had a way of looking past certain things, the same way you might look past a crooked row in someone's garden, because you know the season has been hard for them. But Bishop King had died that spring of a stroke, sudden, in his own barn, and the district had drawn lots for a new bishop, as is our way, choosing from among the ordained ministers by placing a slip of paper inside a hymnal and letting each man draw, trusting that God's hand guides the choosing. And God's hand, or however you wish to think of it, had landed on a much younger man named Bishop Zook, a man in his 30s at the time, serious, exacting, raised in a stricter district up near the Maryland line before his family moved to ours. Bishop Zook believed, sincerely and without malice, that our district had grown soft in its final years under Bishop King. He believed the Ordnung had been allowed to bend in ways that were, in his words, opening a door for the world to walk through. And in that members' meeting, the first he led as our bishop, he had asked, in front of the whole gathered church, whether there were any households keeping photographs. He had not accused anyone by name. That was not his way, not at first. But he had spoken plainly about the sin of vanity, about the danger of a graven image, about how a small compromise in one generation becomes a wide open door in the next, and how he could not in good conscience lead a district where such things were kept in secret, even in a drawer, even in a Bible. My father had not said a word in that meeting, or so my aunt told me years later. He had simply sat and listened and gone home in the dark, and sat at his own kitchen table in silence while my mother's chair creaked beneath her. The next morning, the Tuesday I am telling you about, he came into the kitchen while my mother was hanging the first line of wet laundry out on the yard line. And he did not say anything to any of us children, not one word of explanation. He simply walked to the front room where the family Bible sat on its stand, and beside it, in a cigar box that had belonged to his own father, the small collection of photographs our family owned. There were not many, perhaps a dozen, perhaps 15. A photograph of my mother's parents on their wedding day, taken before they had even joined church, back when photographs were more common in that branch of the family. A photograph of my father as a young man, hat in hand, squinting into the sun, taken by an English neighbor with a box camera at a threshing bee. A photograph of my oldest brother as an infant, taken by that same English neighbor, who had, I think, simply enjoyed taking pictures and handing them around as gifts, before anyone thought too hard about whether they should accept them. A photograph of my mother and father together, taken not long after they married, standing stiffly in front of this very farmhouse, my mother's hand resting on the porch rail. My own baby photograph was in there too, wrapped in a scrap of blue flannel. My father carried the cigar box to the stove. I was standing in the doorway between the front room and the kitchen. I do not think he saw me at first, or if he did not send me away, which surprises me even now when I think back on it, because he was not a man who let his children linger in the middle of grown matters. He opened the stove door with the iron hook that hung on its nail beside the wood box, and the fire inside roared up orange and hungry, the way a good stove fire does when fresh air reaches it. And he began, one by one, to feed the photographs into the flame. He did not do it quickly. That is the thing I remember most, more than the fire itself, more than the smell of it, which was different from ordinary wood smoke, sharper, almost bitter, from whatever chemicals were in the old photograph paper. He did not rush. He held each photograph for a moment before he let it go, and I remember his face, how still it was, how he did not weep, did not sigh, did not say a single word the whole time, but how his jaw worked once, just once, hard, like a man biting down on something, when he held up the photograph of my mother's parents on their wedding day. My mother came in from the yard partway through, her arms still full of wet clothespins, and she stood in the kitchen doorway across from me, and she did not stop him either. She watched. I saw her lips move, just barely, and I have wondered my whole life since whether she was praying, or whether she was simply mouthing goodbye to those faces the same silent way a person says goodbye to someone getting onto a train. The photograph of my own baby self went in. The photograph of my brother as an infant went in. The wedding photograph of my mother's parents went in, and that one burned longest, I remember, because the paper was thicker, older, and it curled up at the edges like a leaf before it finally caught. And then there was one photograph left in the cigar box, and my father held it in his hand for a long moment, so long that I thought perhaps he had changed his mind, that perhaps this last one would be spared and returned to its box and hidden away in some drawer the way other families in our district, I would later learn, had quietly done with theirs. But then he leaned forward and let it drop into the flame, same as all the others, and I watched it curl and blacken and vanish, and I did not think anything more of it, because from where I stood in the doorway, I could not see what was on that last photograph before it went into the fire. I only saw the back of it, plain and white, no different from any of the others. It was only many decades later that I would learn that photograph was not, in fact, the last one that went into the fire that day. There was one more, and my father had not burned it. But I am getting ahead of myself, and I promised you I would tell this story the way my grandmother taught me to tell stories, from the beginning through to the end, without skipping the middle just because the middle feels slow. So let me back up, and let me tell you about the years that came between that fire and the day I finally understood it, because those years matter. They are not simply the waiting room before the real story begins. They are the real story too. Life on our farm went on after that Tuesday, much as it had before, at least on the surface. My father did not become a different man overnight. He was still the same father who woke before 4 every morning to milk, who worked from can't see to can't see, as we used to say, meaning from the first light you could see by to the last, who came in at noon smelling of hay and cattle, and sat down at the table and bowed his head in silent prayer before every meal. A silence so complete you could hear the clock ticking and the flies buzzing at the window screen. He was still the father who, on a rare Sunday afternoon when church was not held at our house, would sometimes take us children out to the pond behind the north pasture and let us wade in up to our knees while he sat on the bank with his hat pushed back, watching, saying very little, but there, present, his eyes on us the whole time. He was not a cruel man. I want to be very clear about that, because I know some people, when they hear stories like mine, imagine a stern, cold, frightening figure, and that is not who my father was. Not really. He was quiet. He was serious. He did not laugh often, and when he did laugh, it came out low and short, more like a cough than a laugh. But it was real, and my brothers and I treasured it when we managed to earn one. He believed in hard work and plain living and humility before God, and he raised us to believe the same, not through long lectures, because he was not a man of many words, but through the simple daily witness of how he lived. My mother was the warmer of the two, if I am honest, the one who would pull me onto her lap even when I was really getting too big for laps, the one who hummed hymns under her breath while she worked in the garden, the one who would sneak an extra spoonful of brown sugar onto our oatmeal on a cold morning and tell us not to mention it to Dad. But even she, I noticed as I grew older, seemed to hold something back around my father. Not fear, exactly. It was not fear. It was more like the careful way you might walk around a piece of furniture in a dark room that you know is there but cannot quite see the edges of. A carefulness, a respect that had, tucked somewhere inside it, a kind of watchfulness too. I had 7 brothers and sisters, though as I mentioned, not all of them lived to adulthood, and I will tell you about the 2 we lost, because their loss is part of this story too, even if it seems at first like a separate thread. My oldest brother was named Samuel, 4 years older than me, steady and responsible from the time he was tiny. The kind of boy who was mucking out stalls before he was tall enough to see over the stall door. After Samuel came my sister Katie, 2 years older than me, who had my mother's quick laugh and my father's height, and who I adored the way a younger sister adores an older one, following her everywhere, wearing her hand-me-downs before they were even properly handed down. Then came a brother named John, who died of scarlet fever at just past 2 years old. Before I was born, a loss my mother rarely spoke of but which I came to understand later, had left a mark on her that never fully healed. The way a scar left on skin is smooth and quiet on the surface, but still tells you, if you run your finger over it, that something happened there. Then came me, Miriam. After me came my brother Levi, then my sister Anna, then my youngest brother Daniel, and then, last of all, a baby sister named Ruth, who came when I was already 12 years old, and who my mother nearly died bringing into the world, a hard birth that left her weaker for the rest of her days, though she never once complained of it in my hearing. I want to pause here on the name Anna, because I know if you are paying close attention, that name is going to matter later in this story, and I do not want to seem as though I am hiding it from you or being cagey. My sister Anna was a real person, a real sister, with brown eyes and a stubborn streak that got her into more trouble with our mother than the rest of us combined. She is not the Anna this story turns on. But I will tell you, When I finally learned what I am about to tell you, the fact that my father had a daughter named Anna in his own household, years after the fire, after everything that happened, struck me as either a strange coincidence or something closer to an act of quiet remembering that he could not have explained even to himself. I have gone back and forth on which it was my whole life, and I am not sure I will ever fully settle it. But I wanted you to know, so that later, when I use that name again in a different context, you understand I am not confusing you. There were, in a sense, two Annas in my father's life, and only one of them grew up under his roof. Our days on the farm followed the rhythm every Amish farm child of that era would recognize. Up before dawn for chores, milking for those old enough, feeding the chickens and gathering eggs for those of us who were smaller. School at the one-room schoolhouse 2 miles down the road, where we walked in all weather, rain or shine, or the deep snows that came some winters up to our knees. Taught by a young unmarried woman from our own district, who taught all 8 grades in that single room, English lessons alongside German ones, arithmetic on slate boards. Home again for more chores, supper at the long table, with all of us packed in shoulder to shoulder. My father at the head, my mother at the foot nearest the stove, so she could serve without getting up more than she had to. Evening prayers. Bed by the light of a kerosene lamp, because of course we had no electricity, and the whole house would go dark and quiet by 8 or 9 o'clock most nights. The only sounds the settling of the old wood frame and, sometimes, if the wind was right, the lowing of the cattle in the barn. Church was held every other Sunday, rotating between the households of our district. A full morning of singing from the Orsbund, our old hymnal. The song sung so slowly, each syllable drawn out over so many notes, that a single hymn could take 20 minutes to complete. Followed by preaching, 2 sermons, the first shorter, the second the main sermon, often lasting an hour or more. All of it in the Pennsylvania Dutch dialect we spoke at home, mixed with the High German of the old texts. On the Sundays, church was not held at a particular house. Families visited one another, or rested, or in the case of us children, were sometimes allowed a rare afternoon of freedom to run the fields and climb the hayloft and play games that left us filthy and happy by the time supper called us home. It was, in most ways a person could measure, a good childhood. I do not say that to defend the community I came from against people who might assume the worst of it. And I do not say it to pretend there was no hardship or no rigidity that chafed against me even then. Because there was. And I will tell you honestly about some of that chafing before this story is through. But I loved my family. I loved the smell of my mother's kitchen, and the sound of my father's low voice reading scripture at the table on Sunday evenings, and the particular hush of a winter morning before anyone else in the house was awake. When I would sometimes creep down to the kitchen just to sit near the warmth of the banked stove and feel, for a few private minutes, like the whole quiet world belonged only to me. But there was always, underneath all of it, a kind of silence in my father that none of us children ever managed to name. Not while we were young, not even as we grew older and began to notice it more clearly. A silence that lived behind his eyes sometimes, when he thought no one was watching him. A stillness that would come over him on certain days, days that seemed to have no particular cause that any of us could point to, when he would go quiet even for him. Quiet in a different way, and my mother would find small excuses to keep the younger children occupied and out of his path until it passed. I did not understand for most of my life what those days were. I assumed, as children do, that it was simply my father's nature, the shape of the man he happened to be, the way some people are naturally cheerful and some are naturally solemn. It did not occur to me that a person's nature might in fact be a kind of scar tissue grown up over a wound that never had the chance to heal properly, because it was never allowed to be spoken of at all. Before I go further, I want to pause for just a moment, the way I might pause in the middle of telling this story on my own porch, to pour a little more meadow tea for whoever was sitting with me. If you are still here, if this story has hold of you even a little, I would be grateful if you would take just a second to tap that like button, and if you have not already, to subscribe, so you do not miss what comes next. It truly does help an old woman's story find its way to more ears, and I do thank you for it. Now, where was I? Time moves strangely when you are young, and then it moves strangely again when you are old, though in the opposite direction. When I was a girl, the years between that Tuesday morning by the stove and my own wedding day felt endless, an ocean of ordinary days stretching out ahead of me. Now, looking back from where I sit, those same years feel like they passed in the space of a single breath. I grew from a girl of 9 into a young woman. I finished school at 14, as was our way, and went to work full-time on the farm and in the house alongside my mother, learning to can vegetables and put up preserves and quilt and bake bread that did not come out heavy as a brick, which took me longer to master than I like to admit. My older brother Samuel married and moved to a farm of his own 2 miles away. My sister Katie married a young man from a district over in the next county and moved further still, so that I saw her only a handful of times a year after that. Always a joyful reunion, always too short. I myself married at 21, a young man named Jonas, a good, steady, quiet man, not unlike my own father in many ways, which I did not fully appreciate until much later in my marriage, how much comfort there was in that familiarity. We settled on a farm not far from my parents, close enough that I could walk over on a Tuesday afternoon with my own children in tow, and my mother would have the kettle on before we even reached the porch steps, as though she had felt us coming. My father grew older the way all fathers do, though I confess it always surprises the child in each of us, no matter how old we ourselves become, to watch a parent's strength begin to fade. His back bent forward a little more each year from decades of labor. His beard, already gray from a young age as I told you, went fully white by the time he reached his 60s. He gave up the heaviest of the farm work to my younger brothers, Levi and Daniel, who had both stayed on the home farm, though he never fully gave up working altogether. Not until his body simply would not allow it anymore. Because a man raised the way he was raised did not know how to sit idle, even when idleness was exactly what his body was asking of him. My mother passed first, when I was 43 years old and she was 68, her heart simply stopping one night in her sleep, gently, the kindest way such a thing can happen. Though, of course, no way is truly kind when you are the one left behind to feel the empty side of the bed, or in my father's case, the empty chair at the foot of the table, where she had sat for over 40 years. I remember going to the farm the morning we got word, riding over with Jonas in our buggy before the sun was even fully up, and finding my father sitting alone at that kitchen table, not weeping, because I rarely if ever saw my father weep openly in my whole life, but simply sitting, both hands flat on the table in front of him, staring at nothing. And I understood, even then, that I was looking at a man revisiting a grief that was not entirely new to him. There was something practiced in the particular stillness of his sorrow that morning. Something that told me, though I could not have explained it in words at the time, that this was not the first time in his life he had sat exactly like that. My father lived another 18 years after my mother passed, growing quieter with each one. Though he was never unkind, never neglectful of us, never anything but a faithful, steady, if increasingly silent presence at the center of our large extended family. He moved into the small grandfather house attached to the main farmhouse once my brother Daniel and his wife took over the primary household and the raising of their own children there, as is our custom. The older generation stepping back but never entirely away, always close enough to hear the grandchildren's feet on the stairs, always close enough to be called upon. He kept a small garden of his own behind the grandfather house, mostly herbs and a few rows of tomatoes, tending it slowly with a cane in his later years, and he took to whittling in the evenings, small animals and simple toys for the ever-growing crowd of grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren who came to visit. He read his Bible every night by lamplight until his eyes grew too weak, and then my niece would read it to him instead, and he would sit with his eyes closed, listening, his lips sometimes moving along with verses he had known by heart for 80 years. He passed in his 91st year, in early spring, in his own bed in the grandfather house, with several of us gathered around him, myself included, holding his hand as his breathing slowed and then simply stopped, as gently as a candle going out when there is no more wick left to burn. I will not pretend to you that it was not a sad morning, because it was deeply sad, the kind of sad that settles into your bones for weeks afterward. But it was also, in its way, a peaceful passing, the kind every family hopes for and few are fortunate enough to receive, and for that I have always been grateful. The funeral in our tradition happens quickly, usually within 3 days, and it is a plain affair by the standards of the wider world. No flowers, no eulogies of the kind you might see at an English funeral. Simply a service of scripture and hymn singing held in the home, followed by a procession of buggies to the graveyard, where he was laid to rest beside my mother, beneath a plain gray stone, with only his name and his dates carved into it. No verse, no epitaph, because that too was not our way. It was in the days that followed the funeral, the days when the family gathered at the home farm to begin the slow, tender work of sorting through a lifetime of a person's belongings, that I found the photograph. It was my job, along with my sister Ruth and my sister-in-law, Daniel's wife, to go through my father's clothing and his personal effects in the grandfather house, while my brothers dealt with the tools and the farm equipment and the larger, more practical matters an estate requires attention to. This is women's work in our tradition, sorting through the intimate leavings of a life, deciding what will be kept, what will be given away to those in need, what will simply be laid to rest along with the person who no longer has use for it. It is quiet work, usually done in near silence, punctuated by small exclamations when someone finds something unexpected. A letter, a pressed flower, a coin from a country none of us had ever visited. We started with his dresser, his everyday clothes, his good black suit for church and funerals, his hats, all of it smelling faintly of cedar from the little blocks he kept in the drawers to ward off moths. Then we moved to the small writing desk in the corner of his room, a simple pine piece he had built himself as a young man, with a single drawer beneath the writing surface and a small cabinet below that. In the drawer we found what you might expect. Receipts, a few letters from relatives in Ohio, whom we knew of but had never met. His reading glasses, 2 pairs, one with a cracked lens he had apparently kept meaning to have fixed and never did. A small tin of buttons, but it was in the cabinet below, tucked behind a stack of old farm journals where he had recorded, in his neat, careful hand, decades of weather and crop yields and the birth dates of calves, that my sister Ruth's fingers, found something that did not feel like paper or leather. Something stiffer. Something that had been wrapped, carefully, in a piece of soft cloth that I recognized. With a small jolt, as a scrap of the same blue flannel my baby photograph had been wrapped in all those decades ago, before it went into the fire. Ruth unwrapped it slowly, the way you unwrap something when you already sense, before you have any proof, that it matters. And inside the cloth was a photograph. I want to describe it to you exactly as I first saw it, because I have looked at it so many times since that day that I could describe every crease and every faded corner of it with my eyes closed. But I want you to see it the way I saw it that very first time, before I knew anything at all about what I was looking at. It was an old photograph, older, I could tell immediately, than any of the ones I remembered from that morning by the stove 61 years earlier. It was a formal photograph, the kind taken in a studio, the subjects posed carefully against a plain painted backdrop. The woman seated, a man standing behind her with one hand resting on her shoulder in the stiff, formal way people held themselves for photographs in that much earlier era, when a photograph was still a rare and costly thing, not something you could simply snap on a whim. The woman in the chair was young, perhaps 22 years old, wearing plain dress not unlike what my own mother would have worn, a cape dress with an apron. Her hair parted and pulled back beneath a prayer covering, unmistakably Amish, or at the very least plain in some closely related tradition. In her lap, she held an infant, wrapped in a white christening gown of the old style, the baby's face turned slightly toward the camera, eyes open, one small fist raised near its own cheek the way infants do, and the man standing behind her, his hand on her shoulder, was my father. I knew him instantly, even though he looked so young in that photograph, younger than I had ever known him in life. Younger even than in the one photograph of him as a young man that I remembered burning in the stove that Tuesday morning of my childhood. He had no beard yet in this photograph, which told me, once I understood our customs well enough to reason it through, that he was not yet married, or had only very recently married, because in our tradition, a man grows his beard once he takes a wife and never shaves it again for the rest of his life, keeping the mustache bare in the old style but letting the beard grow full. Here, in this photograph, my father's face was bare, unmistakably my father's face, the same strong jaw, the same deep-set eyes I had looked into my whole childhood, but young, unlined, and wearing an expression I had almost never seen on him in all the years I knew him. He looked happy. Not the small, contained, low-cough sort of happiness I occasionally earned from him as a child. He looked, in that photograph, genuinely, openly happy. His eyes crinkled at the corners, the faintest suggestion of a real smile pulling at his mouth, the kind of smile a man does not know how to hide when he is standing behind the two people he loves most in all the world. I stood there in my father's empty room, holding that photograph in my own two hands, and I could not make sense of what I was looking at. Because I knew, with absolute certainty, based on every date and every fact I had ever been told about my family, that this photograph could not possibly be of my mother. My mother had never in her life sat for a photograph like this that I knew of, and besides, the young woman in the chair, though I could see only her profile clearly, did not have my mother's particular features. Not the shape of her nose, not the set of her chin. I turned the photograph over, my hands trembling slightly, I will admit, and there, on the back, in a hand I did not recognize, was written a single line in the old German script Many of the older generation still used for personal writing, even when their everyday speech was Pennsylvania Dutch. It said, translated roughly into English, Eli, Anna, and little Leah, "Blessed be the Lord." There was a date beneath it. A date that placed this photograph nearly 6 years before my parents' own wedding day. The wedding day I knew from the family record kept in the front of our Bible. The wedding day whose photograph I had watched burn in that very stove. My father had been married before. My father had a wife before my mother. A wife named Anna, and a child named Leah. And nobody, in my entire life, in 61 years of being his daughter, had ever once spoken their names to me. I do not know how long I stood there in that room, the photograph shaking slightly in my hands, before Ruth noticed my face had gone strange, and came to my side and looked over my shoulder at what I was holding. My sister-in-law came too, and the three of us stood crowded together in that small room that still smelled faintly of my father, of his pipe tobacco and the cedar blocks in his drawers, and none of us said anything at all for what felt like a very long time. It was Ruth who finally spoke, and what she said was simply, "Who is that?" I did not have an answer for her. I turned the photograph over again and read the German inscription aloud, translating it slowly, my voice not entirely steady. Eli, Anna, and little Leah. Blessed be the Lord. My sister-in-law, who had married into our family and did not carry the same lifetime of assumptions about my father that Ruth and I did, was the first to say the obvious thing none of us wanted to be the one to say. She said, "Was he married before your mother?" And I remember feeling in that moment a strange kind of vertigo, the sensation of the ground shifting slightly beneath a floor I had walked on my whole life, without ever once questioning its solidity. Because of course, once she said it aloud, once the words were spoken in that small room, it was the only explanation that made any sense at all. And yet it was also, somehow, entirely unthinkable, because in 61 years, not my father, not my mother, not a single aunt or uncle or elder in our community had ever, not once in my hearing, made even the smallest reference to such a thing. We called my brothers in from the barn. I remember Daniel's face when he saw the photograph, how he went pale beneath his sunburn, how Levi took it from his hands and stared at it for a long, long time, without speaking, turning it over to read the inscription himself, as though he did not quite trust that Ruth and I had read it correctly. We called Samuel too, though he had to be fetched from his own farm 2 miles away, and by the time he arrived, the whole family, all of us who were present that day for the sorting of our father's things, had gathered in the front room of the grandfather house, passing the photograph from hand to hand, each of us needing, it seemed, to hold it ourselves before we could quite believe it was real. I want to tell you honestly that the reactions in that room were not all the same, because grief and shock do not move through every person identically, even within one family, even among people who grew up in the very same house. My brother Daniel, the most tender-hearted of us, wept almost immediately, not loudly, but with tears simply running down his face as he looked at that small photographed infant, our sister, or rather, our half-sister, whom none of us had ever known existed. He kept saying, "Why didn't he tell us? Why didn't he ever tell us?" My brother Levi, always the more practical of the two, was the first to ask the harder question, which was where this Anna and this Leah were now, whether they had died, whether there might be living relatives somewhere. A whole branch of our family we had never known to look for. Samuel, the eldest, was the quietest, and I remember him standing near the window for a long while, looking out at the fields our father had worked his whole life, and finally saying, in a low voice, "There was a day, when I was maybe 7 or 8, that Dad went out to the far pasture by himself and didn't come back until after dark. I remember Mem sending me out to bring him in for supper and finding him just standing at the fence line, not doing anything, just standing there. And when I asked him what was wrong, he told me to go back to the house and said he'd be along directly. I never thought anything of it until just now. That was the first small piece of a larger puzzle we would spend the following months assembling, each of us contributing a fragment we had never before understood the weight of. A day father seemed strange. A comment Mother made once and never repeated. A hymn father would sometimes ask to be sung at gatherings, an old, somber one, not commonly requested, that none of us had ever thought to ask him why he favored. We did not, that day, reach any conclusions beyond the bare fact the photograph itself told us. We agreed, as a family, that we would try to learn more, gently, respectfully, without tearing open old wounds carelessly, but that we could not simply put the photograph back in its cloth and pretend we had never found it. Too much had already shifted, and I think, though none of us said it quite this way at the time, we all felt a kind of ache on our father's behalf, a grief for him that was separate from our own grief at losing him, because we understood, even in that first confused hour, that whatever had happened to Anna and to Leah, our father had carried it silently, alone, for the better part of 70 years, without ever once being able to speak their names to the children he raised. I went home that evening to my own farm, to my husband Jonas, and I could not eat my supper. I sat at my own table, in my own kitchen, with my own grown children coming and going around me, and I could think of nothing except that photograph, the young, happy face of my father. The young woman I now knew must have been his first wife. The infant in her lap who would have been, had she lived, my own half-sister, decades older than me, perhaps even old enough to have been more like a mother to me than a sister. Had things gone differently? I did not sleep well that night. I lay awake beside Jonas, listening to him breathe steadily beside me, and I found myself doing something I had not done in years, which was trying to remember every small detail I could recall about my father's silences, his quiet days, the particular stillness that would sometimes come over him for no reason any of us children had ever been able to name. And for the first time in my life, those silences did not feel like simply the shape of the man he happened to be. They felt like evidence, like the visible edge of something much larger, submerged, that had been there the whole time, running beneath the surface of every single day I had ever spent in his house. The next morning, I decided I was going to find out who Anna and Leah had been, and what had happened to them, no matter how long it took me, or how many difficult conversations I had to learn it. There was one person still living who I thought might know something, and that was my father's younger sister, my Aunt Lavina, who was, by that point, 86 years old herself, living in the small house behind her own daughter's farm in a district about 10 miles from ours. Aunt Lavina had always been the family member who remembered everything, the keeper of birthdays and old stories, and the particular way certain recipes were supposed to be made, the one you asked when you wanted to know which cousin had married which other cousin's sister-in-law's nephew, and how they were all connected. If anyone alive still knew the truth about the photograph, I felt certain it would be her. I asked Jonas to drive me over the following week, and I brought the photograph with me, wrapped again in its scrap of blue flannel, tucked into my apron pocket the whole ride over, my hand resting against it the entire way, as though it might somehow slip away from me if I did not keep it close. Aunt Lavina was sitting on her small porch when we arrived, shelling lima beans into a bowl in her lap. and she smiled her usual warm smile when she saw me climbing down from the buggy, calling out a greeting in Dutch. But I think something in my face must have told her, even before I said a word, that this was not an ordinary visit, because her smile faded into a more careful, watchful expression as I climbed the porch steps. I sat down beside her, and for a few minutes we simply talked of ordinary things, the weather, her garden, my children. The way you do before working your way toward a harder subject, because that is our way. You do not simply blurt out a difficult question the moment you arrive. You ease into it the way you ease into cold water. But eventually I could not wait any longer, and I took the photograph from my apron pocket and unwrapped it and held it out to her without a word. I watched her face change as she looked at it. Her hands, which had not stopped shelling beans the entire time we spoke of lighter things, went completely still. She stared at that photograph for a long, long moment, and then she looked up at me, and her eyes, I remember, had gone bright and wet, though no tears actually fell, and she said very quietly, "Where did you find this?" I told her. I told her about the sorting of Dat's things, about the cabinet beneath the writing desk, about the flannel wrapping. And Aunt Lavina set the bowl of lima beans down on the small table beside her chair, very carefully, as though she needed both hands free for what she was about to say. And she was quiet for a long moment, looking out at her daughter's fields, before she finally began to speak. "I wondered," she said, "if this day would ever come. I am not surprised it took so long. I am only surprised, a little, that it has come at all, because I thought perhaps he had destroyed that one too, the same as the others." And then, slowly, with many pauses, with her eyes often drifting away from me to some middle distance where I understood she was not seeing her daughter's fields at all, but seeing instead a much older scene playing out in her memory, my aunt told me the story of my father's first family. Eli, my father, had married young, at 20 years old, a full 6 years before he married my mother. His first wife was a young woman named Anna Byler, from a district some distance from ours, whom he had met at a wedding, the way many young people in our communities meet their future spouses, since weddings in our tradition often draw young unmarried people from several districts at once, and there is a great deal of matchmaking, formal and informal, that happens in the corners of those long wedding celebrations. Anna, my aunt told me, had been a lively, warm young woman, well loved in her own district, known for her quick wit and her beautiful singing voice. A voice so clear and true that she was often asked to lead the hymns even as a young unmarried girl, which was somewhat unusual for someone so young. My father, quiet and serious even then, had apparently been utterly captivated by her from their very first meeting, and their courtship, my aunt said, was the talk of both districts for a season, an unusually swift and certain match between two young people who seemed, to everyone who knew them, perfectly suited to one another. They married when he was 20 and she was 19, and they settled onto a small rented farm not far from where our own home farm would later stand, and by all accounts, my aunt said, they were happy. Deeply, simply happy, in the way young married couples often are before the world has had much chance to test them. A little over a year into their marriage, Anna gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Leah, after my father's own grandmother. My Aunt Lavina, who would have been perhaps 8 or 9 years old at the time, remembered being taken to see the new baby, remembered her own mother, my father's mother, exclaiming over how beautiful little Leah was, how she had her mother's dark eyes and her father's strong chin even as a tiny infant. The photograph, my aunt told me, had been taken not long after Leah's birth, at a studio in the nearest town, by a photographer that some of the English families in the area used, and that a handful of the less strict Amish families of that era, before the community's rules on photography had hardened as firmly as they later would, occasionally used as well, particularly for a milestone as significant as the birth of a first child. It was not common, even then, but it was not unheard of either, not in that particular district in that particular decade, before Bishop Zook and men like him began tightening the Ordnung in the way I described to you earlier. For a little over a year, my aunt said, Eli and Anna and baby Leah lived what appeared, from the outside, to be a full and contented family life. And then, my aunt said, her voice dropping lower, her hands finally beginning to tremble slightly where they rested in her lap, there was the fire. I asked my aunt to tell me everything she remembered, even the parts that might be hard to say, even the parts that might be hard for me to hear. And she nodded slowly and took a long breath, the way a person does when they are about to lift something heavy. And she continued. It happened in late winter, she said, in February, on a night when the temperature had dropped bitterly cold, the kind of cold that settles deep into old farmhouses and makes every family bank their stoves as high as they safely can before bed. My father, Eli, had gone out to the barn late that evening to check on a mare that was due to foal, a difficult birth he had been monitoring closely for 2 days. And he had been out there, my aunt said, for several hours, working to help bring the foal safely into the world, a task that in the end took him through most of the night. While he was out in the barn, something went wrong inside the house. Nobody, my aunt told me, ever knew exactly what caused it. Not for certain, though there was much speculation over the years that followed. The most common belief, passed down through what little the family ever discussed of it, was that a lamp had somehow tipped or been knocked over, perhaps by a draft, perhaps by some small accident in the deep hours of the night, and that the old farmhouse, dry as tinder in that hard winter, had gone up terribly fast. By the time my father came in from the barn, drawn by I do not know what, some instinct, some smell of smoke carried on the wind, or perhaps simply the ordinary rhythm of a man checking in on his sleeping family after long hours away, the house was already engulfed. My aunt said the neighboring farms saw the glow of it from more than a mile off and came running, come as fast as horses and men on foot could come in that kind of cold and that kind of dark. But by the time enough hands had gathered to organize any real effort against it, there was little left to save. My father, my aunt told me, her voice barely above a whisper now, had tried to go back into that burning house. Several of the neighbor men who arrived first had to physically hold him back, because the upper floor, where Anna and baby Leah would have been sleeping, was already collapsing in on itself by the time he reached the yard from the barn. 2 of the men who held him that night, my aunt said, were still alive when she herself was a young woman, and she remembered, as a girl, overhearing one of them describe it to her own father years later at a funeral gathering, describe how Eli had fought against them with a strength that took 3 grown men to contain, screaming Anna's name and the baby's name into a night so cold that a person's breath froze visibly in the air, even without a house fire roaring nearby to make it worse, screaming until his voice gave out entirely and he simply collapsed into the snow, and had to be half carried, half dragged away from what remained of his home. Anna and Leah did not survive. Their remains, my aunt said, delicately, were recovered the following day once the ruins had cooled enough to be searched, and they were buried together, mother and daughter, in a single small service that the whole of both districts turned out for, because a tragedy of that scale touches every family in a close community, even those who were not close kin to the ones lost. My father, Aunt Lavina told me, was 22 years old when this happened. 22 years old, and in the space of one single February night, he had lost his wife, his infant daughter, his home, and by every account my aunt had ever heard from those who knew him in that period, very nearly his own sanity along with them. He did not speak, my aunt said, for nearly 2 weeks after the fire. Not a single word, to anyone, not even to his own mother, who took him into her house to nurse him through the raw physical injuries he had sustained. Burns on his hands and forearms from some attempt he had made to get closer to the flames before the neighbor men restrained him. Injuries that left faint scarring my aunt said she had noticed on his hands and arms her whole life afterward, without ever once being told, until she was much older herself, exactly how he had come to have them. When he finally did begin speaking again, my aunt said, he was, in ways both large and small, a different man than the young husband and father he had been before that night. The lively courtship everyone had once gossiped about, the deep and easy happiness his marriage to Anna had been known for throughout both districts, all of that seemed to have burned away along with the house itself. He grew quiet. He grew serious in a way that went beyond the ordinary seriousness expected of a grown Amish man. He threw himself into work with an intensity that worried his own family, my aunt said, taking on extra labor for neighboring farms, rebuilding what remained of the small rented property with his own hands, even though he had no wife left to share it with, as though the physical exhaustion of hard labor was the only thing that gave him any peace at all. And he never, not once, in all the years that followed, spoke Anna's name or Leah's name aloud again in my aunt's hearing, not even to her, his own sister, not even in the private moments of grief a brother and sister sometimes share that they would never share with the wider community. We simply did not speak of it, my aunt told me, and I could hear, even in her old age, even after so many decades, a kind of pain in her own voice at the memory of that enforced silence. That was our way then, perhaps more than it is even now. When a great sorrow came to someone, we surrounded them with quiet care, with meals brought to their door, with hands to help with the work. But we did not ask them to speak of the sorrow itself, because we believed, I think, that speaking of it only reopened the wound, and that a person needed to be allowed to close it over in their own time, in their own way, with God's help, and not with a great deal of talking about it. I do not know, looking back now with all these years behind me, whether that was wisdom or whether it was its own kind of cruelty. I have wondered about it many, many times since. I sat on that porch beside my aunt for a long while after she finished speaking, both of us quiet, the bowl of half-shelled lima beans forgotten on the little table between us, and I thought about my father, 22 years old, standing in the snow, being held back by 3 grown men, while everything he loved burned in front of him, and I thought about him going on, after that, to marry my mother 4 years later, to build an entirely new life, to raise 8 more children, to become the quiet, steady, deeply reserved man I had known my whole life, without ever once understanding what lay beneath that reserve. And I thought about that Tuesday morning by the stove, 61 years earlier, when I had watched him burn every photograph our family owned. And I understood finally with a clarity that made my chest ache exactly why he had kept that one small photograph hidden, instead of feeding it into the flame along with all the rest. I asked my aunt one more question before Jonas and I left her porch that afternoon, a question that had been sitting heavy in my chest the whole time she spoke. I asked her whether my mother had known, whether my mother, in all her years married to my father, had known about Anna and Leah. Aunt Lavina nodded slowly. "Oh yes," she said. Rebecca knew. How could she not have known? The whole community knew. At least those old enough to remember it by the time your parents married. It was not a secret in that sense, Miriam. It was simply a sorrow that belonged to a time before you children existed. And once your father remarried and began his second family, the community, out of the same instinct that kept them from speaking of it to him, directly after the fire, simply let it recede into the past and did not bring it forward into the new life he was building. Your mother would have known the whole history before she ever agreed to marry him. It would have been discussed, quietly among the families, the way such things always were before a match was made. But once she married him, I do not believe she ever raised it with him afterward. Not because she did not care, but because she understood, better than almost anyone, how much it cost him to carry. This surprised me less than perhaps it should have, once I sat with it for a while, because it fit so perfectly into the pattern of silence I had grown up inside, without ever fully recognizing it as a pattern. My mother had been a warm woman, a loving woman, but she had also been, I now understood, a woman who had built her entire married life around the careful management of a grief she was never permitted to discuss with the very person who carried it. She had married a widower, a man who had lost everything once already, and she had spent the rest of her life, I began to see, quietly protecting the fragile peace he had managed to construct for himself, never disturbing it, never asking him to revisit what still, all these years later, so plainly haunted him. I thought of all those small moments from my childhood I had never understood. The days father would go quiet in a different way. Days my mother would find reasons to keep us children occupied and out of his path. I asked myself, now, whether those days might have fallen near a particular date each year. And though I could not be entirely certain after so many decades, I found myself increasingly convinced, as I turned it over in my memory in the weeks that followed, that they clustered, more often than not, somewhere in the depths of February. My aunt told me a little more that afternoon, filling in pieces of the years between the fire and my parents' marriage. My father had lived essentially alone for those 4 years, she said, working other men's farms for wages, saving carefully, eventually acquiring the lease on the land that would, much later, become the home farm where I myself was raised. He did not court anyone during that time, as far as my aunt knew, did not show the slightest interest in remarrying, and it was, in fact, his own mother, my grandmother, who eventually and gently began encouraging him toward the idea, worried as any mother would be watching her son live so entirely alone, so entirely turned inward, year after year. My mother, Rebecca, my aunt told me, came from a family in a neighboring district, and the two of them were introduced, as many matches were in that era, through a mutual connection, at first simply as an act of community kindness, rather than any grand romantic notion. My aunt said my mother had told her, once, many years later, that she had gone into that courtship with her eyes open, understanding fully what she was taking on, understanding that she would be, in some sense, always living a little in the shadow of a grief that predated her, and that she had chosen it anyway, because she had seen something in my father, even in his quietness, even in his careful reserve, that told her he was a man capable of deep, faithful love, if only someone was patient enough to help him find his way back to being able to give it. And by every account I have ever gathered, in all my years of asking gentle questions of the elders who remembered that time, my mother succeeded. My father loved her. I do not doubt that for one single moment. Not after everything I came to understand in the months following the discovery of that photograph. He loved her in his own quiet, undemonstrative way. The way he showed love through steady provision and unwavering faithfulness, and the small silent gestures I remembered from my own childhood. An extra blanket laid over a sleeping child on a cold night. A hand resting briefly, wordlessly, on my mother's shoulder as he passed behind her chair at the table. He built a whole new life with her. A full life, 8 children, 60 years of marriage before her own passing. And I do not believe, not for one moment, that any part of that love was diminished or divided by the grief he still carried for Anna and for Leah. But I do believe, and I have come to believe it more firmly with every year that has passed since I found that photograph, that a person can hold 2 things at once inside a single heart. A full, real, faithful love for the family he built with my mother, and an equally real, equally faithful, and utterly unspoken grief for the family that had been taken from him before any of us ever existed. I do not think those 2 things were in competition with one another inside him. I think they simply lived side by side. The way 2 rooms can exist within the same house, one door always kept closed, but the house itself still whole, still standing, still a home. Which brings me back, at last, to that morning by the stove when I was 9 years old, and to the members' meeting the night before that had set it all in motion. I have thought about this more than almost anything else in my life, turning it over the way you turn a stone in your hand, feeling its weight from every angle. And I want to share with you the understanding I eventually arrived at, though I want to be honest and say I cannot know my father's heart with absolute certainty. He was not a man who explained himself, and he was gone before I ever had the chance to ask him directly. Everything I am about to tell you is my own best understanding, built from the pieces my aunt gave me, and from 61 years of watching him live his life. But it is, in the end, a daughter's interpretation of her father's silence, and I offer it to you as such. When Bishop Zook stood before our congregation that evening and spoke of the sin of vanity, of graven images, of the danger of photograph poses to a humble heart, I do not believe my father heard those words as an attack on sentiment in general. The ordinary sentiment a person feels looking at a photograph of a beloved face. I believe, instead, that my father, more than almost anyone else sitting in that room, already understood something Bishop Zook was trying, in his own stern way, to teach. My father already knew, from the deepest, most painful experience a person can have, exactly how dangerous it is to fix your whole heart onto a single frozen image of a happiness that can be taken from you in a single night. I believe that for 4 years after the fire, before he ever met my mother, my father lived with almost nothing to hold on to of Anna and Leah except memory. Because in that era, in that place, a single photograph might have been all that existed of them. And I do not know, even now, whether that photograph survived the fire itself or was kept elsewhere. Perhaps at his mother's house, precisely because a young father wanted some tangible thing to hold when the ache became too great to bear through memory alone. And I believe, though I cannot prove it, that in the years that followed, that single photograph became, for my father, not simply a treasured memento the way it might be for someone with no complicated history attached to such images, but something closer to a wound he returned to, again and again, in the private hours when no one else could see him do it. A thing he could not put away, and yet a thing that, every time he looked at it, opened the same door onto the same unbearable night. When Bishop Zook spoke of the danger of fixing your heart too long and too often on a single still image, I believe my father, sitting silently in that room, recognized in those words a description of his own private torment, dressed up in the language of doctrine, but true nonetheless, true in a way that had nothing to do with pride or vanity, and everything to do with grief that had never been allowed to heal properly, because it had never been allowed to be spoken. And I believe that when he went home that night and sat in silence at his own kitchen table while my mother's chair creaked beside him, he was not simply weighing a question of religious obedience. I believe he was recognizing, perhaps for the first time in over 20 years, an opportunity offered to him almost by accident through a stern young bishop's sermon on an entirely different subject, to finally do something about a photograph that had been quietly consuming him from a locked drawer for 2 decades. I believe that when he burned the photographs of my mother's parents, of his own younger self, of my infant siblings and myself, he was doing it, at least in part, out of genuine obedience to what he understood to be God's instruction through his church, the same obedience that shaped every other part of how he lived his life. But I also believe, and this is the part that took me the longest to fully accept, that burning those newer photographs, the ordinary happy photographs of his second family, his second chance at love, gave him something he needed almost as much as obedience. It gave him a kind of terrible fairness. If he was going to finally release the one photograph that had haunted him for 2 decades, the photograph of Anna and Leah, then perhaps some part of him could not bear to keep photographs of the rest of us while letting theirs go. Perhaps it would have felt, to a man carrying that particular grief, like choosing one family over another, like saying, without ever having to say it aloud, that Anna and Leah mattered less than the family that came after them. And so, in the end, I believe, he could not burn that first photograph after all. I believe he stood at that stove, prepared, truly prepared, to release his hold on all of it at once, and that when it came to that final photograph in the cigar box, the one I could not see from where I stood in the doorway, his hands simply would not do it. 20 years of carrying that grief in silence had worn a groove into him too deep for even his own iron discipline, forged through decades of obedience to a faith that asked more of its followers than almost any other I have ever heard of, to overcome in that single moment. He let the rest of us go into the fire, every photograph of his second family. His living family, the 8 children and the wife who had rebuilt his whole life with him. And he kept, hidden, wrapped in flannel, tucked behind farm journals in a drawer none of us would ever think to search. The single photograph of the wife and daughter whose loss had shaped the entire rest of his existence, whether any of us ever knew it or not. I do not think this makes him a hypocrite. I want to say that plainly, because I know some who hear this part of the story might be tempted to think of it that way. Might think, well, if he was going to disobey the bishop's teaching for one photograph, why not simply keep them all? But I do not believe that is a fair reading of what happened in that man's heart, and I have had many years now to sit with it and consider it from every side. I believe, instead, that my father was living out, in that single terrible choice at the stove, the truest, most honest expression of a grief he had never once in his life been permitted to express in any other way. He obeyed his church in every visible respect. He never spoke Anna's name. He never displayed her photograph. He never, so far as any of us ever discovered, visited her grave in any way that drew attention or comment from the community. Though I later learned, and will tell you about shortly, that this was not entirely true either. But in the one private, hidden corner of his life where no bishop's teaching could reach, in a drawer beneath his own farm journals, my father kept faith with the wife and daughter the world had taken from him, and he carried that faith, silently, for the remaining 61 years of his life, until the day my sister Ruth's fingers found it wrapped in a scrap of blue flannel. I want to stop again for just a moment here, because we are coming into the part of the story that means the most to me, and I would be so grateful If this has touched you at all so far, if you would let me know down in the comments where you are watching from today. I have heard from people in places I have never even seen on a map, and it does something to an old woman's heart, sitting here in my kitchen in Pennsylvania, to know a story from my small life has traveled so far. And if you have not yet done it, the like button and the subscribe button are right there, and they truly do help more than you might think. Now, let me tell you what we did once we understood the fuller truth. Once I returned from my Aunt Lavina's porch and shared everything she had told me with my brothers and sisters, our family spent a good deal of time simply sitting with it, the way you sit with news too large to fully absorb all at once. We are not, as a people, given to grand emotional displays, even within our own families, even in private. But I will tell you that there were tears shed in the weeks that followed, by all of us, at different times, in different rooms of that grandfather house, as we continued the slow work of sorting through our father's remaining belongings, now looking at every item with new eyes, wondering what else might be hidden among his things that we had not yet thought to search for carefully enough. We found nothing else in the end. No letters from Anna, no other photographs, no written record in his own hand of that first marriage, or its ending. Except for one thing, which I will tell you about shortly, because it was, in its own way, the most moving discovery of all. But first, I want to tell you about the grave. My Aunt Lavina had told me, that afternoon on her porch, that Anna and Leah were buried together in the graveyard belonging to Anna's own home district, some distance from ours, in a plot my father had purchased for them at the time. A plot that, by every account my aunt had, he had never sold or transferred, despite everything that followed, despite his remarriage, despite building an entirely new life many miles away. My aunt believed, though she could not be entirely certain after so many decades, that the graveyard was still in use by that district today, still maintained by the community there, and that the graves, if the old plot records still existed, could very likely still be found. My brothers and I decided, as a family, that we wanted to find that grave. Not to disturb anything, not to make any grand gesture that would have felt false to who our father was, but simply to see it, to stand where he must have stood, at least in those early years before he moved away and built the life we all came from, and to pay our own quiet respects to the sister and the mother we had never known we had. It took some doing. The district Anna had come from no longer existed under that same name, having split and reformed several times over the decades, the way districts sometimes do as populations grow and shrink. But with the help of an elderly minister in that area, a distant relation by marriage whom my brother Levi tracked down through a series of careful, gentle inquiries, we eventually located the old graveyard, a small, quiet plot of ground behind a meeting house that had itself been rebuilt at least once since Anna's time, though the graveyard itself had remained in continuous use. We found the stones on a mild afternoon in early autumn, several months after the funeral. All of us who had gathered that first day in the grandfather house, making the drive together, along with several of our own grown children who asked to come once they heard the story. Wanting, I think, to understand more fully where they themselves had come from. The stones were small, plain, gray, exactly like every other stone in that graveyard and in our own, because that is our way. No ornamentation, no elaborate carving, simply a name and a set of dates, the same humble uniformity in death that we practice in life. Anna's stone read simply Anna Fisher, with her birth and death years beneath her name. Beside it, a smaller stone. So small it took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. Read Leah Fisher, with a single year beneath her name, because she had lived, in total, not even 14 months. I stood in front of those 2 small stones for a long time, my brothers and sisters gathered quietly around me, none of us speaking for what felt like several minutes, and I found myself, without quite deciding to do it, reaching into my apron pocket for the photograph which I had brought with me that day, and holding it up, comparing the young, hopeful faces in that image to the small gray stones in front of me. Trying, the way you try to hold 2 very different truths in your mind at the same time, to understand that this joyful young mother, this small perfect infant with her fist raised near her cheek, and these 2 plain stones in a quiet country graveyard were one and the same story, simply told from its beginning and from its end. My brother Daniel, who I told you was the most tender-hearted among us, knelt down in the grass in front of Leah's small stone and stayed there for a long while, and when he finally stood again, his face wet with tears he did not try to hide from the rest of us, he said something I have never forgotten, and that I want to share with you now, because I think it captures something true about the whole of what we had learned. He said, she would have been our sister, not our half-sister, our sister, the same as any of us, if things had gone differently. And instead, she's been lying here alone in the ground for almost 90 years, and none of us even knew to come. We stayed a while longer, and before we left, my sister Ruth, who had a gift for such things, gathered a small handful of wildflowers growing along the edge of the graveyard, and laid them, simply, without ceremony, across both small stones, and we said together, quietly, the Lord's Prayer, the same prayer that closes our own church services, and then we climbed back into our vehicles, some horse and buggy, some the cars of our own children who had left the Amish faith in their own generation, and we drove home in a strange, heavy, but somehow also peaceful silence, each of us alone with our own thoughts about the family we had lost before any of us had ever been born. I promised I would tell you about one more discovery, the one I called, a moment ago, the most moving of all, and I have saved it until now because I did not fully understand its significance until after we had visited Anna and Leah's graves, until I had time to sit with everything my aunt had told me and let it settle properly into my understanding. You will remember that among my father's belongings, in that same cabinet beneath his writing desk, we had found his old farm journals, the ones where he recorded, in his neat, careful hand, decades of weather and crop yields and the birth dates of calves. At the time we first found them, in the same hour we discovered the photograph, we had set them aside without much thought, focused entirely on the photograph itself and the questions it raised. It was not until several weeks later, after our visit to the graveyard, that I asked my brother Levi, who had taken the journals home with him to look through for any useful farm records, whether he had noticed anything else unusual in them. Levi told me he had not thought to look for anything in particular, but that my question made him curious enough to go back through them more carefully. And a few days later he came to my house with 3 of the oldest journals, going back to the earliest years of my father's second marriage, and he showed me something that, once I saw it, I could not believe none of us had noticed before, though I understood immediately why we had not. Because it was such a small thing, easy to overlook entirely if you were not looking for it. Every single year, on the same date in February, my father had made an entry in his farm journal that was different from every other entry surrounding it. Where the rest of the journal recorded practical matters, the weather that day, which fields had been plowed, which animals had been tended to, the entry on this one particular date each year, every single year for over 60 consecutive years, contained only a single line, written in the same careful hand as everything else, but set apart somehow, indented slightly differently, as though he had paused before writing it and taken more care with it than with the entries around it. The line, translated from the old German script, was always some slight variation on the same simple words. Some years it read only, Anna and Leah. Blessed be the Lord. Other years it read, 14 years today, or 22 years today, or some other number. A count I understood immediately, once I saw the pattern laid out across 60 years of journals, to be marking the years since the fire. I sat at my own kitchen table with those journals spread out in front of me, turning through decade after decade, watching that single line appear, unfailingly, every February, through all the years of his second marriage, through the births of all 8 of us children, through my mother's own passing, through his final years alone in the grandfather house, and I understood, finally, with a completeness that took my breath away, that my father had never once, not for a single year of his entire adult life, failed to privately mark and remember the anniversary of the night he lost his first family. He never once told any of us. He never once, so far as we ever discovered, took a day off from his farm work to mark it openly. Never once asked for any special consideration or comfort on that day. At least not that any of us could identify looking back. He simply carried it, silently, faithfully, year after year, decade after decade, writing a single private line in a farm journal that recorded, on every other page, only the most practical and unremarkable details of an ordinary life. And, in doing so, keeping a kind of vigil that none of us had ever known to keep alongside him. I want to tell you what I felt, reading through those journals, because I think it is the truest thing I can offer you from this whole long story. I felt, more than anything else, a profound and aching tenderness toward my father that I do not know that I had ever fully allowed myself to feel while he was alive. I had loved him, of course, my whole life, the way a daughter loves a father. But I think I had also, without ever quite realizing it, held a small measure of quiet frustration toward him too, toward his reserve, his silences, the way he never seemed able to speak easily of feeling the way my mother could, the way some of my friends' fathers seemed able to. I think, if I am honest with you, I had sometimes wished, as a younger woman, that my father had simply been a warmer, more openly affectionate man, and I had, in my own quiet way, held that wish against him a little, without ever naming it as such even to myself. Reading those journals, I understood finally what that reserve had cost him to maintain, and what it had been protecting all those years. I understood that the same silence I had sometimes experienced as distance had in fact been a kind of extraordinary discipline, a decades-long act of private mourning conducted with a faithfulness that put my own small frustrations to shame. My father had not been a cold man. He had been a man carrying an enormous weight every single day of his adult life, and carrying it so quietly, so completely without complaint or visible strain, that none of his own children had ever once suspected its existence until after his death revealed it to us. I do not think this understanding erased every difficult feeling I had ever carried about my father, because grief and love and forgiveness are rarely so simple as that, rarely arrive in one clean, complete wave that washes everything else away. But it changed something fundamental in how I remembered him, how I thought of him in the years since, and I believe it changed something in each of my brothers and sisters too, each in our own way, as we passed those journals around among ourselves and sat with what they revealed. I have had many years now, since that autumn day at the graveyard, to sit with everything I learned about my father, and I want to share with you some of what I have come to understand. Not as doctrine, not as any claim to wisdom beyond my own small experience, but simply as the honest reflections of an old woman who has had a long time to turn a hard story over in her hands. I think, growing up as I did, inside a community that valued silence around suffering in the particular way mine did, I absorbed certain lessons about grief that I did not fully examine until I found that photograph. I had always understood, in an unspoken way, that a person was meant to bear their sorrows quietly, to trust that God saw what others could not, to find comfort in prayer and in the steady rhythm of daily work rather than in speaking openly of pain. There is real wisdom in parts of that way of living. I still believe that. I have seen over a long life how a community that gathers around a grieving family with meals and labor and quiet presence, without demanding that the grieving person perform their sorrow or explain it or justify it, can offer a kind of comfort that our modern world, with all its talk of openness and expression, sometimes struggles to provide. There is a dignity in being allowed to grieve in your own way, on your own timetable, without an audience. But I also think, now, having seen what that silence cost my own father, that we can take a good and true instinct and press it too far, until what began as respect for a person's private sorrow becomes instead a kind of exile, a sentence to carry an unbearable weight entirely alone for the whole of a lifetime, with no one ever permitted to help carry even the smallest corner of it. I do not think my father needed the whole community weeping alongside him every February for 60 years, but I do wonder now what it might have meant for him if even one person, my mother perhaps or my aunt, had simply been able to say to him, once, plainly, I know what today is, and I am here, and you do not have to pretend with me. I wonder if that single sentence, spoken even once in 60 years, might have lightened something in him that none of us ever got the chance to lighten. I have tried, in my own life, to hold both of these truths together, the way I believe my father, without ever saying so, was also trying to hold them together in his own heart. I believe in quiet strength. I believe in bearing what must be borne without excessive complaint, in trusting God through hardship rather than only through comfort. But I have also tried, especially as I grew older and became a mother and then a grandmother myself, to make sure the people I love know that I see them, that I know when they are carrying something heavy, even if I do not press them to speak of it before they are ready. I learned that lesson from my father's silence, in the end, even though he never once tried to teach it to me directly. Sometimes the most important lessons a parent gives a child are not the ones they mean to give at all. I have also thought a great deal, over these years, about forgiveness, though I want to be careful in how I use that word, because I do not think my father did anything that required forgiveness in the ordinary sense. He did not wrong me by keeping his first family's memory private. He did not fail me as a father by carrying his grief the way his own upbringing had taught him to carry it. If there is any forgiveness in this story, I think it is not forgiveness I owe my father, but rather a kind of forgiveness I have had to extend to my own younger self. The daughter who sometimes wished her father were different than he was, who did not understand because she could not have understood what he was protecting inside himself all those years. I have had to forgive myself, in a sense, for not knowing something I had no way of knowing, and for occasionally resenting a silence whose true weight I could never have guessed at. And I have thought, too, about the photograph itself, about what it means that my father, in the one uncontrolled, unguarded moment of his entire disciplined life, could not bring himself to destroy that single image, even under the weight of his own church's teaching, even at real risk to his standing in a community whose good opinion he otherwise spent his whole life carefully maintaining. I think that moment tells us something important, something almost hopeful, buried inside what is otherwise such a sorrowful story. I think it tells us that even the most disciplined, most obedient, most outwardly controlled among us carry a core of feeling that no rule, no bishop, no lifetime of careful conformity can entirely reach or extinguish. My father spent 61 years following the letter of a teaching he clearly believed in, and yet he kept, hidden but never destroyed, the one thing that teaching asked him to give up. I find, in that quiet act of private defiance, more evidence of the depth of his love for Anna and Leah than I think any open display could ever have given me. So what became of the photograph itself, you might be wondering? And what became of our family in the years since we found it? Let me bring you up to where things stand today, and then I will close this story properly, because I know I have kept you a long while already, and I am grateful, more than I can easily say, for your patience in sitting with me through all of it. The photograph itself lives with me now. My brothers and sisters agreed, when we finally sat down together to decide what should be done with it, that as the one who first held it in that upstairs room, and as the one who had carried it to Aunt Lavina's porch and back, I should be the one to keep it safe. I do not display it. Not in the way an English family might frame a photograph and hang it on a living room wall, because that is still not entirely our way, even now, even after everything I have come to feel about it. But I keep it close. I keep it wrapped still in that same scrap of blue flannel, in a small cedar box on the shelf inside my own bedroom closet, and I take it out from time to time, especially in February, and I sit with it for a while, the way I imagine my father must have sat with it in whatever private moments he allowed himself over all those decades. I had copies made, eventually a decision that took me some time to feel at peace with, given everything I understood about my father's own complicated relationship with photography by the time I was old enough to understand any of it. But I spoke with my own bishop about it, a much gentler man than Bishop Zook by all accounts, and after a great deal of thought and prayer, I decided that giving each of my siblings a copy, so that Anna and Leah's memory would not depend entirely on the survival of one single fragile piece of paper, was not the same thing as the vanity my father's church had once warned so sternly against. I do not display my copy either. I keep it in my own Bible, the way, I suspect, some families in Bishop King's more gentle era once kept theirs, tucked quietly between the pages, present, honored, but not paraded. My brother Daniel, the tender-hearted one, asked if he might have a small headstone added beside Anna and Leah's original markers, a simple additional stone that reads only, "Remembered by the family of Eli Fisher," and to our surprise, the district that maintains that old graveyard, once we explained our connection and our purpose, gave their blessing readily, and that stone has stood there now for a number of years, small, plain, gray, exactly matching every other stone around it, exactly as our whole community's stones are meant to match one another in humble uniformity. My children and grandchildren have visited it, several of them on trips through that part of the county, and my grandson, who is something of a keeper of family history himself, though he left our faith some years ago and lives what we would call an English life now, has begun compiling a written record of everything we learned, so that Anna and Leah's names, and the fuller shape of my father's early life, will not be lost again to the kind of silence that swallowed them for nearly a century. I think often about what it means that this story reached me at all, that a single scrap of blue flannel and a photograph tucked behind farm journals survived 61 years of a disciplined, private man's careful life, waiting for the day his children would finally sort through his belongings and find it. I do not know whether my father intended for us to find it eventually, or whether he simply could not bring himself to destroy it and trusted that whatever happened to it after his death was no longer his concern. I like to imagine, though I cannot know this for certain, that some small part of him hoped we would find it one day. That some part of him wanted Anna and Leah to be known. Eventually, even if he himself could never be the one to make them known while he lived. My own children have grown up knowing this story, in a way I never did at their age, and I have watched it shape them in small but meaningful ways. My daughter named her own second daughter Leah, after the small sister none of us ever had the chance to know. And every time I hear that name called across a farmyard now, called to a living, laughing little girl chasing chickens or helping her mother in the garden, I feel something in my chest that I do not have an entirely adequate word for. Something that sits somewhere between sorrow and gratitude, and a kind of fierce, tender hope that the silence that once swallowed one Leah's name will never again be allowed to swallow another. We have also, as a family, begun a small new tradition of our own, born out of everything we learned. Every February, on the date my father marked so faithfully in his journals all those years, several of us now gather, usually at my house or at Daniel's, for a simple supper. Nothing elaborate. Nothing that would have felt foreign to the plain way we were all raised. We do not make it a mournful occasion, exactly, though there is always a quiet undercurrent of remembrance to it. We simply sit together, share a meal, and someone, usually one of the younger grandchildren who never knew our father at all, asks to hear the story again. The story of the photograph, of Anna and Leah, of the fire and the 61 years of silence that followed it. And one of us, usually me now, since I am the eldest still living who remembers that Tuesday morning by the stove with my own eyes, tells it again, a little differently each time perhaps, but always true to its heart. In this way, what was once a private, unspoken grief carried alone by one man for 6 decades has become, instead, a story our whole family owns together. Told and retold, kept alive not through silence anymore, but through the opposite of silence, through voices gathered around a table, willing at last to speak the names that once could not be spoken at all. I am 79 years old now, as I sit here telling you all of this. I have outlived my husband, Jonas, who passed 6 years ago, and I have watched my own children become grandparents in their turn, so that I now hold great-grandchildren on my lap the way my own grandmother once held me on hers, shelling peas on a porch in the evening, always some small task keeping her hands busy, while her voice carried the family's stories forward to whoever was willing to sit and listen. I think that is, in the end, what I am trying to do for you today. I am trying to be, for whoever you are, wherever in this world you are listening from, a little bit like that grandmother on the porch. Passing a story forward so that it does not disappear into silence the way my father's first family so nearly did. Before I let you go today, I want to leave you with a few final thoughts, because I do not believe a story like this one is worth telling if it does not leave something behind for you to carry with you. Something a little more useful than simply a tale to pass the time. The first thing I want to leave you with is this. If there is someone in your life, a parent, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle, anyone who has grown old carrying a silence you have never quite understood, I would gently encourage you not to wait as long as I did to ask them about it. I do not say this to place blame on myself, because I truly did not know there was anything to ask about until the day that photograph fell into my sister's hands. But I have thought, many times since, about all those years I might have had the chance to sit with my father and simply ask him, gently, in whatever quiet moment presented itself, whether there was a story behind his silences that he might ever want to share. I do not know that he would have told me. He may well have kept that door closed his whole life, regardless of how many times I knocked on it. But I regret, a little, that I never once tried the handle, never once let him know that I would have been willing to listen, had he ever wanted to speak. The second thing I want to leave you with is this. Grief that goes unspoken does not disappear. I think, in my younger years, I believed, without ever quite putting it into words, that the strong, quiet way my father carried himself meant that whatever sorrow he had once known had simply healed over completely, the way a scraped knee heals and leaves a child running and playing again within the week. I understand now that this is not how grief of that magnitude actually works. Not in my father's life, and I suspect, not in most lives. Grief that is never spoken does not vanish. It simply goes underground, and it finds other ways of surfacing. In silences, in certain unexplainable moods on certain unexplainable days, in a careful reserve that a family might mistake, as I sometimes did, for simple coldness or distance, when in fact, it is nothing of the kind. If you are carrying something heavy and unspoken yourself, I would gently say to you, from the far end of a long life, that finding even one person you trust enough to speak it to, even just once, even just partially, may be a kindness you owe yourself, that my own father, through no fault of his own, given the world and the community he was raised in, never quite let himself receive. The third thing I want to leave you with, and perhaps the thing I hold closest of everything I have learned through this whole long process, is that the people who raised us are so rarely only the people we think we know. Every person who has ever lived long enough to become a parent, or a grandparent, or simply an elder in a family, has lived a whole life before we ever arrived to witness only a portion of it, and much of what shaped them into the people we knew happened in years and rooms and moments we were never present for, and can only reconstruct, imperfectly, from photographs and journals, and the faltering, partial memories of relatives who are themselves growing old. I think there is a kind of humility in remembering this, a way of holding the people we love, even after they are gone, with a little more patience and a little more grace. Understanding that whatever frustrated us about them, whatever silences or hardnesses or strange habits we never quite understood, may well have had roots reaching down into soil we never even knew existed. My father was, by the time I knew him, a quiet, serious, deeply faithful man who loved his family in his own reserved way, and who carried, silently for 61 years, a grief none of us ever suspected until the very last days of sorting through what he left behind. He was not a perfect man. I do not tell you this story to make him into some flawless saint, because he had his hard edges, his stubbornness, his moments of frustrating silence that even now, knowing everything I know, I sometimes still wish had been softer. But he was, I have come to understand, a man of extraordinary faithfulness, a man who kept a private vigil for a lost wife and daughter for 61 consecutive years, without once asking anyone to acknowledge the weight he carried. And who, in the one photograph he could not bring himself to burn, left behind for his children a final, wordless message that took us 61 years, and a great deal of gentle searching to finally understand. I am so grateful, more than I can properly say, that you sat here with me today and let me tell you his story, and Anna's story, and little Leah's story. because I believe that every time a story like this one is told and heard, it does something small but real to keep a person's memory alive a little longer in this world. Anna Fisher and Leah Fisher lived, briefly, quietly, ordinarily, the way most of us live, and they were loved, deeply and completely, by a young husband and father who never stopped carrying that love for the rest of his own long life. I hope, in some small way, that by sharing their story with you today, I have helped carry a piece of that memory forward too, out beyond our own family, out into all the wide and different places you yourselves are watching from tonight. If this story moved you even a little, I would be so grateful if you would take just a moment, right now, before you go on to whatever comes next in your day, to press that like button, because it helps this story find its way to others who might need to hear it too. And if you would like to hear more of my memories, more stories from my own long life, and from the lives of the family who came before me, I would love for you to subscribe, so that you do not miss what I share next. And please, before you go, tell me in the comments where in this world you are joining me from today. I read every single comment. My granddaughter helps me with the reading of them at my own kitchen table. And I promise you, it means more to an old woman like me than you could easily guess, to know how far a small story like this one has traveled, and how many different lives, in how many different places, were willing to sit and listen all the way through to the end. Thank you for spending this time with me. May you go on from here carrying a little more patience for the silences of the people you love, and a little more curiosity about the stories that live quietly beneath them, waiting, sometimes for a very long time, to finally be found.